Hi folks. So one thing that any GM or creative person probably has run into is burnout. So today I'm going to talk to you about how I get through creative ruts or running into creative burnout. So oftentimes when I run into writer's block or just feel like I'm in a creative rut or a little bit of burnout, these are some of the things that I do to try and get myself out of that rut. So these are in no particular order. First thing, go for a walk. Get out, get away from whatever it is that you're working on, but do something that doesn't require a whole lot of your attention. I like to go on walks, or sometimes even when I'm driving, I will just kind of mull things over because my concentration is enough on the task at hand, but it's like, hey, I'm walking. I don't really have to actively think about, putting one foot in front of the other, but it's able to let that idea kind of just work in the background. This could also be just going around and doing household chores, and I tend to try and not actively think about what it is that I'm struggling with, but if it's easier for you to be thinking it over, talking it through to yourself, these are all things that kind of I've found sometimes work for me. Another thing I will do is that I will read and watch things that are kind of in the same genre or similar to what it is that I'm working on. And this, I find, will help spark some ideas. Sometimes there'll be stuff that I can be like, oh, I can take this, change this around, make it my own, but this story has given me an idea of where I can go next. I can take this thing and change it a little and apply it to the homebrew game that I'm trying to run. So especially for games, I find watching movies that are set in a similar setting as my game or similar feel, even if it's not a fantasy movie, if I'm running a game that's going to have a lot of puzzles or heists, might watch something like a bank heist movie to get some ideas of what are some of the obstacles they could come up against. Also, reading modules I find are really helpful. Like I talked about it in the review video of the Rolled and Told, but reading through those actually gave me a lot of ideas of things I can do in my homebrew campaign that were inspired by those modules. Also, I will read and watch things that aren't related, that I don't see a clear relation to the thing that I'm working on, because sometimes there are weird parallels you can run across, or it's just a good way to give your brain a break. Sometimes that's what you have to do. You can't really push through and work through it. Sometimes you just have to take a step back. I tend to think of it as kind of filling up my creative reservoir of here are all these things that I can draw on, and I can keep pulling from it, but eventually if I don't take time to consume new media or just step away, take care of myself, that reservoir is going to get pretty low and it's going to be a lot harder to work creatively after that. Sometimes you just have to work through it. You just have to sit down and say, I'm going to write, even if it's crap, I'm going to write these notes for this session and then come back to it at a later point. Take an hour or two, come back to it the next day, the next week, and revisit that and edit down to the good stuff. Because there will most likely be some good stuff in there. You just have to edit out all the crappy stuff that you went through. And this is part of the creative process. Nobody starts out amazing, and everybody at some point writes something and looks at it and goes, well, that was crap, but I got through it, and hey, maybe there's an idea in here that I can polish up and make into something great. Another thing that I find very helpful is talking through my ideas with somebody else. So getting a second opinion, getting somebody else to weigh in and bounce ideas off of. This is something I do on any creative project I'm working on when I run into kind of a wall. So for GMs, knowing that if you have, maybe not a player in your group, but somebody else who is a GM or other players, bouncing those ideas off of them, reaching out on the internet and being like, I need some help. Can I talk to some other D&D, Pathfinder, Starfinder folks to figure something out, and then bouncing ideas off of them, finding those folks that you can, or talking to friends that maybe don't play games, but you can talk through some of the story stuff and get their input. See, okay, oftentimes a second or third person will look at it and say, oh, well, why don't you try doing this over here? And that's an idea that you would have never gotten to, or it would have taken you a lot longer. But they're able to see it from a slightly different perspective, or even just from an outside perspective, because they're not as close to it, so it's a little bit easier to be objective. And my final tip is, sometimes you just have to step away. Sometimes it's not, okay, I'm going to go for a walk and think about this. You just have to kind of say, okay, I'm really stuck on this project. It's really frustrating me. I find, especially when I get to the point that I get frustrated trying to work on something, nothing I do is going to be productive at that point. I'm just going to get angry or frustrated with myself or with the project or with the characters that I've created and go, why did I create you that way? What was I thinking? So I just have to set it aside, step away, and give myself some time. However much time that is going to depend on kind of you and how frustrated you are. Sometimes I'm able to step away from it for a couple hours or a day and come back and go, oh, okay, I got this. I've gotten a little bit of distance. I've gone and done other stuff. I've even worked on other projects, but now I can come back to it with fresh eyes. And other times I've had creative projects that I've set aside for months at a time because I had gotten too close to it, or I just reached a point where none of the ideas I was coming up with worked. So I said, okay, I'm going to close the book on this one, and I'll go work on something else for a little bit. And oftentimes I think of something while I'm working on something else that I'm able to go back to that first project and do a little bit more. There have also been a couple of projects that I haven't gone back to because I've moved past creatively where I was when I was working on that, or nothing seemed right. And I think that's an okay thing to acknowledge when it's good to set down a project. So I might not come back to that project ever, and that's okay. It kind of sucks, but I can focus my energy on projects that I'm more excited about or that are more important rather than just repeatedly hitting a wall and not being able to move forward from there. We have done a previous video on GM burnout. You can go check that out up here. Our friend Tucker talked about ways that he gets over his GM burnout, but I thought this would be a fun video to talk about not only when you kind of run into those creative ruts as a GM, but also just a little bit more broadly, just as a creative individual or working on creative projects. I know sometimes I run into ruts with the channel where I'm like, oh, we're doing the same thing and I don't really have any new ideas. But the thing is that I always know that I'm going to get out of the ruts. It's not forever. It's not, I have used up every possible creative idea in my head and I'm never going to have a good idea ever. That's not a good mindset to have, and if you're starting to have those thoughts running around in your head, take some time to yourself. Take some time to refill your creative reservoir, to watch and read and play other games, build that back up, and come at whatever you're working on with some fresh pair of eyes, or get somebody else to weigh in on it. That's one of the things I did with our homebrew campaign. When I first was starting out, I was really nervous, really excited, but also had a few things where it's like, I don't know, there are these 2 points, I need to connect them, and I'm not sure how to make it make sense. So I sent it to a friend who also is a GM and got their opinion on it, and that helped me, us talking through it, I was able to figure out with their help how to make those two ideas connect, how to bridge those two story points, and that really worked well. How do you get out of a creative rut? How do you deal with GM burnout or creative burnout? Let's talk about it down below in the comments. I want to give a special thanks to all of our patrons, especially RV. Hey RV! If you're interested in becoming one of our patrons, getting some cool perks, and helping support us make more cool stuff for you, you can head over to our Patreon page. You can also show your support for our channel by liking the video, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye! Is that all the points I'm going to make? I am so pale.